For nearly half a millennium, people have been producing the works of William Shakespeare, and they all sucked. Until the arrival of Brian Isaac Phillips. Child of Destiny. An artist, a scholar, a visionary, a genius. These are just a few of the people we asked about Brian Isaac Phillips, and without fail, they all responded the same. Who the is Brian Isaac Phillips? A fine question. Who the indeed is Brian Isaac Phillips? Maybe we can find out together, as over the next 6.5 hours, we journey to the center of the nerd. It all began 38 years ago. Some say Brian's birth was heralded by the destruction of a star. And others say it wasn't. Still others say it is impossible for the human stomach to hold a gallon of milk. We may never know the truth. But one thing we do know is that much like the Lord Jesus Christ, Brian's early life is shrouded in mystery. And while rumors and speculation abounded, we may never know the truth. Until Brian's 1998 arrival in Cincinnati, with nothing but his talent, his ambition, and a near-mint condition Boba Fett action figure. After an unsuccessful 3-day bartending stint at the Brass Ass, Brian finally got his foot in the door of the Cincinnati theater scene, with a coveted intern position at the Ensemble Theater of Cincinnati.
Before we sent him down the street and heading towards Rice Street, we did notice that a lot of our paper products were also missing. Toilet paper, soap dispensers.
ETC's contemporary aesthetic and inter-company dating policy soon proved too restrictive for young Master Phillips. And so, he lit out in search of more epic tales and more accessible women. His search soon led him to the Cincinnati Shakespeare Company, or as it was known then, Larry Flint's old-timey Shakespeare Auditorium and Porn Palace.
Oh, sure, I remember when we first met Brian. You know, the heightened emotions and the larger-than-life characters of classical theater really seemed to go well with Brian's unique acting style. I mean, it's not that Brian overacted. I'm sorry, I don't know how to finish that sentence.
Yes, Brian made quite an impression during his first years at Cincy Shakes. Not only on audiences, but also on his fellow ensemble members.
Well, in rehearsal, every time that I got to the phrase, virgin not, Brian would just start to crack up. He would just lose it. And he could not get it back.
He had to play my son in The Tempest. I would have hated to see the mama.
Memorable performances in shows like Coriolanus, Nocturne, and Betrayal soon garnered him the attention of the nation's most venerated and august publication, the Cincinnati Enquirer, who named him one of the year's people to watch. Riding high on this wave of success, Brian soon released his avant-garde spoken word album, Bip on the Rocks.
King Richard goes. When you move on to Henry IV next, you have a story about fathers and sons.
The album sold over 3 copies and was touted by Kanye West as audible. Yes, Brian Isaac Phillips was riding high, the king of the Queen City. But if there's one thing every king of the Queen City needs, it's a Queen City queen of the Queen City for the king of the Queen City. Enter Corinne Mollenhoff. Like Romeo and Juliet, it was love at first sight for Brian and Corinne. Also like Romeo and Juliet, their courtship was trouble-free.
Brian would drive by my house 8 or 9 times a day on his bike, call me and hang up, leave dead birds on my doorstep, stuff like that. It was really romantic.
And is that what attracted you to him?
Well, that and he has a gigantic...
Dick Westheimer here. I was board president when Brian first arrived. My earliest memory of Brian has to be when I stopped by the theater with my son Daniel. We had just seen Star Wars Episode 1, and Daniel was 7 at the time. It just rocked his world. Well, Brian overhears him, and he walks over and he punches him in the throat. And I remember thinking to myself, that guy has leadership potential.
Leadership material indeed. That would soon get a chance to flourish. CSC's then artistic director, Jason Menadakis, departed to throw his hat in with some software nerd named Zuckerberg, leaving CSC in search of new leadership.
So the board wanted to begin an intensive nationwide search, bringing in qualified candidates from all over the country. And I remember turning to them and saying, that Thunderdome.
Brian emerged victorious, and soon his reign of artistic directorship began. The first few months were rough, as Brian and his team found their legs.
And one day, Brian just kind of leaned into my office and he said, Bowman, it's not about the math, it's about the art. I thought, wow, yeah, that is really terrible advice. Really, really terrible.
But much like Bootsy Collins, Brian was soon in the groove, attracting the nation's best young talent and making them better.
When we were doing King Lear a few years ago, and I was playing Cordelia, and there was this scene where Cordelia sees Lear again for the first time after all of his suffering, and I couldn't find the moment. I couldn't feel it the way I was supposed to, and Brian, it was amazing. He came up to me and he looked me in the eye and he slapped me in the face. And he said, Kelly, I can replace you tomorrow. Instantly, the tears were there. Thank you, Brian.
Under Brian's leadership, CSC's reputation continued to grow, nay, blossom, and Brian soon made connections with other prominent Cincinnati theater artists.
In 2006, Brian offered me the role of Cleopatra, and I was absolutely honored and stunned and thought that my talents were finally being recognized, but I should have known better.
Last year I auditioned for Merchant of Venice, and I had barely finished the audition before they gave me the part, and that never happens, but I thought I had done a really good job, but there was probably a better reason.
And then comes the old guy. When Brian offered me Long Day's Journey, I assumed that was going to be the completion of the triumvirate, the fulfillment of the Joplin dynasty. But anybody who knows Brian Phillips knows he's never satisfied. There are never enough Joplins.
All right, Brian, I've told you once. I'm going to tell you one more time. No full frontal.
2 words. Brokeback Mountain. When Brian and I saw that movie with our wives, we made a pledge to share a can of beans every so often.
Oh yeah, I remember the first time, Brian comes up to me, and I only knew him casually, and he's saying, I'm doing Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and I thought, you'd like to come to CSC and, do it with Amy Warner and everything, and I just looked him in the face and I said, what's your problem? I am Bruce Cromer.
And soon CSC's reputation spread across the globe.
But one of the things you've really given me, Brian, is you've always turned a blind eye to whether I'm actually a citizen of the United States or not. Thanks, Brian, for being a friend, a director, a mentor, and keeping me from deportation.
Having elevated CSC's reputation and artistry, Brian soon turned his attention to the facilities. Yes, much like George Jefferson, Brian knew it was time for CSC to be moving on up. Straight up. By like 20 feet.
The CSC offices actually used to be in the basement of the building, and Brian was adamant about getting us out of there. When I asked him what was so important about getting us out of the basement, he made me sit down and watch his Laserdisc copy of the movie Tremors. A lot. Then I got it.
With perseverance, stick-to-itiveness, and some good old-fashioned elbow grease, Brian was able to transform this into this. It was actually much harder than it looks. He built it, and they did come. Who? audiences. When? Usually on the weekends. How often? Fairly. Brian's ceaseless pursuit of artistic excellence was a constant source of inspiration to those around him.
I guess he was working on Romeo and Juliet, but what he was doing was had his Star Wars figurines out, and he was moving them around. You know, I think he had himself sitting in a chair as Han Solo.
And I've been asked to say a few words about my good friend, Brian. Is it Abraham? Brian Isaac Phillips.
Brian never flagged in his efforts to gather to him individuals of the highest caliber, not only on the artistic side, but on the business end as well.
So, Brian brought me in about a year ago. Best idea he ever had. Except it wasn't his idea, see? It was my idea. I snuck it in there on him, Inception style. I got in his head. Guess where else I am? I'm in his office. Except it's not his office, see? It's mine now. No, don't turn it off. I want him to see this.
Just how influential has Brian Isaac Phillips' past decade been? Let's ask some of his colleagues.
Your commitment to the text and bringing these plays that are so rarely seen to an audience, that's going to be your legacy.
I just want to say to Brian, happy 50th birthday. You look great for 50.
Yeah, okay, there was this one time when we... I can't talk about that without talking to my attorney.
As an employer, is making sure that you schedule around all baseball games that are necessary for me to see in town, as well as all the summer blockbusters that we need to organize groups of guys to go to. That, my friend, is your legacy.
Hey Brian, the important thing is that you stay true to who you really are. This is one of those it gets better videos, right?
There's a time that we
Brian is a Steeler fan?
Under Brian's leadership, the Cincinnati Shakespeare Company has become the most ethnically diverse theater company in entire... I almost got through it.
When I came into the company, Brian was already the boss, so I didn't know him when he was, young and scrappy and ingenue, as he insists that he once was.
What? Brian Isaac Phillips? Oh, thank God, because Lou Diamond Phillips is a piece of
You a goat?
No, I don't know who's going to see this. There might be kids or wives or...
But his influence didn't end there. Don't believe me? Let's ask Academy Award-winning actress Emma Thompson. He sure did, Emma. Brian Isaac Phillips. For the past decade, with a steady hand, a deft eye, and a questionable back, has navigated the choppy waters of regional classical theater at the helm of the good ship CSC. Yar. No matter what the next decade may bring, be it zombie apocalypse, robot zombie apocalypse, or Jay Woffington's inevitable descent into Howard Hughes-like dementia, the citizens of the Queen City can rest easy, knowing that their only classical theater is safe under the watchful eye of Brian Isaac Phillips.